something is breaking inside California's machine right now, and most people don't even realize it yet because it won't start with a speech, or a protest, or a viral clip. It starts with a simple, terrifying reality. When the trucks stop moving, the country feels it within days. Grocery shelves don't empty because of politics, they empty because of logistics. And in California, the state that quietly controls a massive share of America's imports and freight flow, a chain reaction is building that could reach far beyond state borders. This isn't a story about left versus right. It's a story about what happens when policy collides with infrastructure, and the infrastructure doesn't blink. What makes this moment so dangerous is that it's not one policy, it's multiple systems tightening at once. Labor rules, supply chain economics, fuel access, refinery capacity, and port congestion are all being squeezed in the same direction. And when pressure builds from every angle at the same time, collapse doesn't look dramatic. It looks ordinary. It looks like calls not getting answered, loads getting dropped, routes being avoided. And then, one day, people notice the prices. Then they notice the delays, and only later do they notice the reason. At the center of this is Gavin Newsom's California. Not because one politician controls every moving part, but because his administration represents a governing style that believes rules can reshape reality. And sometimes they can, but logistics doesn't negotiate. Freight doesn't care what the press release says. Supply chains respond to cost, risk, and access fast. And right now, California is sending signals to the freight industry that the risk is no longer worth it. Here's where the story begins to turn serious. For years, independent truckers, owner-operators who bought their own rigs, built their own routes, and ran their businesses like entrepreneurs have been living under the shadow of a law called Assembly Bill 5. A 5 was sold as worker protection. And yes, in many industries, it was aimed at stopping companies from treating full-time employees like contractors just to avoid benefits. That's the marketing. That's the headline. But trucking is not most industries. Trucking is the bloodstream of the economy. AB 5 hinges on something called the ABC test, and this is where the trap hides in plain sight. A driver can prove they control their schedule and operate independently. Fine, but the third prong demands something that, for trucking, becomes almost impossible. The contractor must perform work outside the usual course of the hiring company's business. Think about how absurd that becomes when the company's business is moving freight, and the contractor's job is moving freight. The law doesn't flex, the result is predictable. Owner-operators become legal targets, not because they broke the law, but because the law defines them out of existence. And here's the part most people miss. This isn't just about classification. It's about liability. It's about risk. It's about whether a company can keep using independent contractors without getting crushed later by retroactive penalties, lawsuits, and enforcement actions. Freight companies don't wait for a state inspector to knock on the door. Their risk departments do the math early, and when the math changes, the routes change. So when the legal fight dragged on for years and then enforcement effectively arrived, the industry's response wasn't emotional, it was operational. Some carriers began stepping back from California loads. Some urged drivers to relocate if they wanted to keep contracting. And suddenly, drivers who invested their life savings into equipment watched their work dry up, not because America stopped needing freight, but because California stopped being predictable. Now, let's zoom out. If even a fraction of California's independent trucking capacity declines, the impact isn't confined to one sector. Trucking doesn't move luxury goods. Trucking moves food, fuel, medicine, equipment, parts, and everyday necessities. It moves everything. The economic chain isn't abstract. A hospital can't treat patients if supplies don't arrive. A grocery store can't stock shelves if distribution slows. A factory can't build if components stall at the port. And California is not a small link in that chain, it's one of the biggest. This is where the story gets bigger than AB 5, because AB 5 is only one pressure point. California is also tightening environmental requirements, fuel infrastructure rules, and regulatory standards that affect the daily survival of logistics networks. The result is that the cost of operating inside California increases, while flexibility decreases. That combination is deadly for industries built on speed and margins. And here's a pattern interrupt. It's not that trucking companies hate regulations, they hate unpredictability. They can plan for higher costs, they can adapt to new rules. What they cannot tolerate is legal ambiguity, rules that can be interpreted differently across counties, courts, and agencies. That's when they stop investing. That's when they stop expanding. And that's when they start quietly moving business elsewhere. Now stack on the fuel side of the equation. Trucking isn't just about drivers, it's about fuel access. It's about refueling networks, station density, predictable supply, and stable pricing. When fuel infrastructure tightens, the entire logistics ecosystem becomes fragile. Even if a driver can legally operate, can they reliably refuel? Can fleets confidently route long hauls through rural corridors without fuel gaps? These questions sound technical, they are. But they're also the difference between a working supply chain and a failing one. California has already faced refinery pressures and capacity issues compared to other states, and as facilities shut down or reduce output, supply tightens. Tight supply causes price spikes. Price spikes change behavior. Carriers reroute, shippers avoid risk, and once that shift happens, it's hard to reverse because logistics networks are built on trust and repetition. Ports, warehouses, fleets, dispatchers, everyone adapts to the new reality. Now, connect this to California's ports. Los Angeles and Long Beach are among the most important gateways for America's container imports. When ports slow, the entire country feels it. But ports don't move containers by magic. Containers move by truck. If truck capacity becomes unstable while port volume remains massive, you get stacking, delays, congestion, and eventually, rerouting. You don't need ideology to predict this, you just need economics. Companies that import goods want reliability. If the fastest, biggest ports become unpredictable because the truck network is tightening, businesses start shifting volume elsewhere, to Texas, to East Coast ports, to alternative routes. Once that happens, California doesn't just lose trucking capacity. It loses economic gravity. This is why the story matters nationally. California is often seen as a policy trendsetter. But supply chains don't reward trend setting, they reward execution. If policies weaken execution, the cost is paid in price hikes and shortages, not just in California, but across state lines. This is the part viewers in New York, Virginia, and Texas need to understand. California's logistical health isn't a local issue, it's a national dependency. Now, to keep this analysis responsible and advertiser safe, we have to be clear about what is fact versus interpretation. AB 5 was passed with stated goals of worker protection. Supporters argue it prevents exploitation. Critics argue it doesn't fit industries like trucking, where independent contracting is often the business model itself. Courts have been involved. Enforcement has been contested. That's the reality. The question isn't whether worker rights matter. The question is whether the implementation is built for the industry is trying to regulate. And here's the deeper issue. Policymakers often underestimate second-order effects. The first-order effect of AB 5 is classification pressure. The second-order effect is carriers limiting exposure. The third-order effect is supply chain contraction. The fourth-order effect is inflationary pressure through reduced capacity. And by the time voters feel it at the grocery store, the political decision that triggered it is already years in the past. That's how governance failures high. They don't explode, they arrive quietly. So why does this feel like it could define Gavin Newsom's record? Because governors are ultimately judged by outcomes, not intentions, and this isn't about one bad headline. It's about whether California's governance model can handle reality when reality pushes back. AB 5 represents a governing philosophy: regulate hard, enforce standards, reshape markets. That can work in some areas, but the freight market is not easy to reshape without cost. At this point, let me say something self-aware. If you're still here, you're not watching politics like a sport. You're watching it like a system: power, rules, economics, consequences. That's what this channel is for. People who prefer this kind of depth don't need hype. They just want the hidden mechanics explained. Now here's where I want your opinion, because this is where the debate gets real. Do you think California is building a safer, fairer system that will pay off long-term, even if it causes short-term disruption? Or do you think the state is creating a self-inflicted supply chain squeeze that will drive more business out and raise costs nationwide? Drop your honest take, because the people in the comments are usually smarter than the headlines. Now let's go even deeper. A state like California doesn't operate like a normal state. It's not just a large economy, it's an economic engine connected to global trade, tech capital, agriculture, energy, and shipping infrastructure. That means the cost of policy error is higher. When California miscalculates, the consequences scale up, and that's why policy friction here becomes a national story faster than in any other state. The most revealing detail is that none of this requires a dramatic collapse to be damaging. If trucking capacity drops by 5%, that's already a shock. If fuel access becomes patchy in rural corridors, that's already a disruption. If port movement slows slightly, that already affects inventory cycles. Supply chains are optimized systems. They don't need to fail completely to hurt people. They just need to slow. This is why companies reroute early. They don't wait for catastrophe. They avoid it. Risk management is preemptive. It's quiet, and it often looks like nothing. Until it looks like everything, and California is sending every signal that the risk is rising. Strict classification enforcement, higher compliance costs, environmental mandates that add complexity, refinery pressures that tighten fuel supply, station upgrade costs that can close smaller fuel locations. Each of these decisions may have its own justification, but stacked together, they form a single message to logistics. Operating here is harder. Now imagine this as a national map. Freight that once moved through California begins shifting out, imports begin rerouting, truckers begin relocating, fuel networks shrink. The state still functions, but at a higher cost. And as prices rise, the political debate turns toxic. Supporters defend the principles, critics weaponize the pain. And somewhere in the middle, working people pay the bill. This is where the ending of the story becomes clear. The real question isn't whether AB 5 is good or bad, it's whether California's leadership understands what happens when the backbone of logistics feels unwelcome. Because if the freight industry shifts away, it won't come back quickly. Supply chains are like water. They flow where resistance is lowest. And once a new channel is carved, it becomes the new normal. And here's the payoff moment. This is the quiet limit of executive power. A governor can sign a bill, he can set a rule, he can announce an initiative, but he cannot force the economy to cooperate if the incentives become hostile. That's where executive authority meets reality and loses. So why does timing matter right now? Because America is already living through cost of living anxiety. People are sensitive to inflation. They notice price spikes quickly. And supply chain disruptions are the fastest way to reignite that pressure. If California's logistics squeeze grows, it won't stay a California issue. It becomes national, because California is too integrated into America's supply system for it to remain isolated. And if Gavin Newsom has national ambitions in the future, this becomes part of the record people debate. Not the intentions, but the impact. Did these policies protect workers while keeping the economy stable? Or did they trigger a system squeeze that harmed everyday Americans? Optional thought before we close. If you like analysis that follows the chain of consequences instead of chasing outrage, you already know where this channel is going. This story isn't finished. The next piece of the puzzle is how states try to regulate major industries without pushing them out entirely, and what happens when enforcement collides with market reality. If you want to keep going, watch the next video where we break down how California's governance model keeps meeting invisible limits, courts, budgets, local resistance, and why that pattern matters far beyond one state. Because once you see the system, you can't unsee it.